Letsky, which is a shame, but I will do it next time. But let me make another point, which is that Keynes, this brings up a point of entry into Keynes. In his actual description of aggregate demand of the firm, he talks about a firm as making a judgment on the expectation of profits. Firms, he says, have to make some judgment about how much profit they make because they have to make a judgment on how much they can sell in the market. The higgling of the market, he calls it. And this is a guess, and it may not be right. But it's been pointed out by people that this is inconsistent with the theory of perfect competition because firms don't make any judgment about sales. They make the assumption they can sell everything they want. Perfect competition means that you sell at the maximum profit any quantity that gives you the maximum profit. So Keynes is inconsistent then with the theory of perfect competition, except that the theory of perfect competition is inconsistent, and it implies that firms must take into account downward sloping demand curves, and therefore Keynes is right to say that firms must take this into account. This becomes important because some economists have argued that Keynes is really inconsistent. He should either take perfect competition, in which firms can't take demand into account, and he says they do, or he should be an imperfect competition, because then you have markup pricing and all of that kind of stuff, and he should be, and one thing we know is that Keynes was vehemently opposed to the idea that his theory had anything to do with imperfect competition. He says, I think it's Leonefoot says, Keynes was adamantly opposed to theories which derive persistent unemployment from rigid wages or from monopolies, labor unions, minimum wage laws, or other institutional constraints on the utility maximizing behavior of individual transactors. The claim that competition would take care of the unemployment problem was one of his pet hates, because he was not saying that unemployment was due to the absence of competition. He was saying it was due to the presence of competition. And that's very similar to the argument in Marx. Davidson points out that Keynes' theory of aggregate demand does not require any notion of market imperfections. And Chrysler points out that Kalecki's theory of aggregate demand was originally formulated on the assumption of free competition. Now, why am I harping on this? That means that the theory of real competition provides a natural foundation for the theory of aggregate demand. Because firms make their judgment on the basis of expected profits. There's a reflexive relation between expectations and actual, and that is what drives the macroeconomic process. And you can find the root of that actually in the schemes of reproduction in Marx, where firms decide to produce something, then they have to buy raw materials, they have to hire workers. So they create a demand for raw materials, the workers create a demand for consumption goods, firms then decide they want to expand, that's a demand for investment, and they hand out some dividends and the capitalists can consume for that. Every one of those demand elements is derived from expected or actual profitability. So profit rules demand and supply, and that'll be this answer to how you get aggregate demand. There's not a demand side story and a supply side story, there's a profit side story. Profit is on both sides of that equation, but not equally, so that's the process by which you get this turbulent equalization. Okay.